in an effort to convince myself and some number of members of the Dimir community that I can, in fact, win some games of Magic with Abhorrent Oculus, I registered Dimir Oculus at a local RCQ, and hopefully I'm going to be able to give you a good idea of why I chose the list I did, what kind of cards make this list unique, why I picked the numbers that I did. I'm going to give a breakdown of all my matches, including some sideboarding and play pattern tips and tricks. And stick around to the end because I am going to be going through all the changes that I would make going forward. So if Oculus is a deck you're thinking of running, maybe at Indianapolis this weekend, or just from one of your local RCQs, I will have an up-to-date example of what the list I would tune would look like. So stick around. As always, if you're enjoying the content, enjoying the commentary, feel free to leave a like, maybe even consider subscribing to the channel. Definitely helps out. Other than that, we'll catch you right back with the intro and the deck tech. All right, so I want to start off by saying that the majority of the credit for the list, like 95%, goes to Gabriel MTG, who top aided the Modern Super RCQ on Moto about a week ago with Dimir Oculus. Gabriel is a member of the Control Freak Discord, so call to action. If you're not a member of the Discord and you want to come ask questions directly to the Dex Builder, then you're more than welcome to come over, come join, link down in the description below, and ask away questions on sideboarding, why certain choices are made. But I'm going to go with my reasoning for a lot of them here in the video. So if you're wanting to hear that, stick around. Otherwise, you can jump ahead to some of the matchup breakdowns. So the only differences that I made from Gabriel's list is I ran a third Thoughtseize in the main over a single copy of Dismember. And in the sideboard, where Gabriel's got 2 copies of Nihil Spellbomb, a additional copy of Thoughtseize, and a second Mystical Dispute, I've got a Toxic Deluge, a Shoot the Sheriff, a second Engineered Explosives, and a second Graveyard Trespasser. So let's go, yes, on your screen, left to right, go through some of the columns here, and we'll talk about the decisions. So from the mana, this is actually a mana base that's almost really is card for card what I run in Dimir Frogtide. So very familiar mana base, and I'm assuming to some extent Gabriel kind of picked up on that because they ran the exact same mana base. So really comfortable numbers for me, really easy to just port that over into Frog like this. I do believe that they said that they've gone up to a 19th land. I don't know if they've cut the second sink into Stupor or not, but I don't mind hitting more actual land drops naturally. For the 1-drop slots, the cantrips, 4 Thought Scour, and 2 Consider. A lot of times you'll see lists on 4 and 4, or you'll see lists on like 4 Consider, 2 Thought Scour. Ultimately, I don't think it affects your win percentage that much, but if it's me personally, I believe 4 Thought Scour is kind of the core cantrip of the deck. You want to be able to have those unfair starts with Oculus. And I will say that there was a number of games that Thought Scour kind of bailed me out when I kept a hand with Unearth that didn't have a threat. So I was able to get some looks with like Surveil up and or fetch up an Undercity, Thought Scour myself, fetch up another Undercity, and you just put a lot of cards in the yard very aggressively. It also won me at least 2 games by being able to get a large Murktide online very aggressively, like an 8/8 Murktide on turn 3. So keep an eye out for those sorts of starts when you're wondering what cantrip you should be running. The 3 Spell Snare and the Stubborn Denial. Gabriel had 2 Spell Snare, 2 Stubborn Denial, so that was one more change. I really like having the 3rd Spell Snare. A lot of my local meta is Boros, so having access to an additional Spell Snare against like Voice of Victory, Johnny, is compared to the Stubborn Denial that's really good as the game goes on. A lot of times once you get past like turn 3, maybe 4, then all those stuff, or all of a sudden those stubborn denials can become a hard negate for like a static prison or a fatal push, something like that, where spell pierce could get paid for very easily. So it is nice having a stubborn denial over something like pierce that can be down the road, especially when stub in the first few turns is like just a force spike. Mentioned the 4 Thought Scours, the 4 Fatal Push, pretty stock. 4 Unearth, pretty stock. 3 Thought Seize. This was kind of another local meta consideration. I have been really happy with 2 Thought Seize in Frogtide. Having the extra one in the Oculus builds opens you up to some lines where you can Thought Seize yourself, discard a threat, unearth it, and kind of get the ball rolling that way. But mostly it's because the RCQ I played last week, there was a lot of Eldrazi in the room. So I kind of wanted access to that 3rd Thought Seize in the main so I could fight against some of the Eldrazi stuff. The rest of the deck, fairly stock in the main. 4 Counterspell, 4 Frog, 4 Oculus, 2 or 3 copies of Murktide. Harbinger of the Seas might be one that looks a little bit awkward. Gabriel did run the Harbingers, and online especially, a lot of Eldrazi everywhere. In my local meta, there's a lot of Amulet Titan, so I didn't mind having the Harbingers in the main. Like I said, with the Thought Seize, I saw a bunch of Eldrazi the other day, so didn't hate the idea of that little extra punch available. And then the 3 Force Negation to help fight against some of the unfair stuff running around, because there's always going to be like a Belcher player in the room. But more importantly, it allows you to tap out to your threats a little more comfortably and hold up force. In the sideboard, the 3rd copy of Harbinger, mostly for the Eldrazi decks, for Amulet Titan, stuff like that. 3 Stern Scolding for the aggro creature decks. I got a lot of use out of the Stern Scoldings this weekend. Really happy to have the 3 there. 4 Consigned to Memory. I wish Eldrazi wasn't quite so popular, because that's a lot of sideboard spot to come in for only one specific, or Consign comes in for multiple matchups, but the only thing that I actively want it for is Eldrazi. And what I mean by that is, if Eldrazi wasn't a deck, I would not run Consigned to Memory and just for like Amulet Titan. I would run something else that overlaps. So if Eldrazi wasn't there, Consign would not be in my sideboard, like, period. 2 Graveyard Trespasser. Gabriel had 1. Again, we've got a lot of like Boros locally. So Graveyard Trespasser being a good value engine against Flake decks. I also saw a lot of Orzhov the other day. We don't normally have a lot of Orzhov, but apparently 3, 4, 5 people were on it. So Graveyard Trespasser, really good unearthable threat that provides you some value. Hit it by making them discard. Also starts hitting creatures out of their graveyard to make their overlords a little less consistent. 2 Engineered Explosives. This is definitely a question mark one. Like, why is that the case? And it's because I saw multiple Jeskai Ascendancy decks top 8 the other day, and I knew there was going to be a lot of Boros. So I was looking for something that would overlap in those 2 matchups, take out like Saga Constructs and Moxes against Jeskai Ascendancy, take out Static Prisons or Ocelot Prides, Ocelot Tokens against Boros. And Engineered Explosives was about the only thing that overlapped the way I wanted. You could run something like Dress Down to have a little better answer into Saga tokens, but I wanted something that got things off the board, not just shut them down for half a turn cycle. The Shoot the Sheriff, I had moved the 3rd Thoughtseize to the main, so basically replacing the Thoughtseize Gabriel had in the sideboard with the removal spell that I took out of the main. I thought about Dismember, but I just kind of wanted a more catch-all out of the sideboard. Definitely makes me weaker into an opposing Flage, or not Flage, an opposing Ketramos. But with like Graveyard Trespasser, with the full 4 counter spells, Oculus being able to kind of overwhelm, then I'm just hoping I'm not running into that matchup left and right. Toxic Deluge does give me an answer to stuff like Flage, as well as a Wrath effect for all the Boros. Like I said, it's pretty popular, so I don't mind having a couple extra pieces of interaction. And then finally, the Mystical Dispute. Um, there's been a bit of blue, but not like heavy counterspell decks, more like Emery decks, Jeskai Ascendancy. There was another Oculus player today. Some rogue brews here and there. So the Mystical Dispute was kind of a nod to a little bit of catch-all counter possibility. So you can bring it in as a bad mana leak in the non-blue matchups, but you can also have it there as like an effective 1 mana answer to anything from an opposing Murktide or an opposing Psychic Frog on the draw, Emery, like that. So a little bit of an efficient counter in those matches where I don't really have a lot to bring in. So that's about it for the list. Let's go ahead and jump into a breakdown of the gameplay and the sideboarding for all of my matches. All right, so I meant to record everything in one sitting. Clearly, if you notice the entire change, I did not. So anyway, let's finish going over this recap. We'll go through all the matchups, talk about sideboarding, how kind of those matchups play out, give you an idea going into your next event, or potentially if you're going to be in Indianapolis this weekend, come say hey. But maybe it'll give you some help there. I've got my life pad with all my matchups, so hopefully it can jog my memory a little bit. Let's go ahead and knock it out. The first round, I was in the blind on the draw. Opponent played a red fetch land, go like an Arid Mesa go. So I kind of assumed they're on either Boros Energy or on Storm, something like that. I've got a hand with like a Psychic Frog, a Fatal Push, a counter spell. What else? Land, something generically okay like that. So they play Arid Mesa go. I play land go. They play land Goblin Bombardment. Nothing on board. I'm like, okay, I don't have an answer to that, but go to my turn. Play my second land. I can either play out my frog or I can hold up counterspell. Decided to play out the frog because I've got like a couple extra lands in hand, and if opponent goes Flage, target the frog and try to make me discard, I'm fine discarding 3 cards to keep my frog around because they really wouldn't have any sort of pressure going on. And if they do spend their turn like using a Static Prison or something on the frog, then that's okay. Worst case scenario is they go a Johnny plus Static Prison, but they didn't play a Johnny on turn 2, and hope they don't have it effectively. Because if I hold up counterspell, like it's not getting better for me if they have those things. I might stop the Johnny, but they still have the Static Prison. So I just play out my frog. Opponent plays a Voice of Victory and passes back. So I have like Fatal Push for the Voice, hit him with the frog, draw into something, but I still have the counterspell up. So pass back. End up counterspelling, I believe, in a Johnny the following turn, but it might have been a Fable of the Mirror Breaker, but counterspelled something, regained a little frog tempo, eventually found a Murktide and kind of closed out the game from there. Of note, my opponent's first fetch, I do believe, got a blue source. So like a Meticulous Archive or a Thundering Falls. And I took note of that. I assumed they were on like Jeskai Energy with Mockingbird, which hasn't been as popular recently, or like hadn't been popular at all recently. But I know historically that's been a build that's seen some play. So sideboarding against energy, brought in, let's see, up the background. Brought in my 3 Stern Scoldings, Toxic Deluge, the 2 Graveyard Trespassers, the Shoot Sheriff, and the 2 Engineered Explosives. Kind of move these over here so you can see. Brought in this right column, mostly EE for like Static Prison Goblin Bombardment, Graveyard Trespasser for Flage, Shoot the Sheriff, Toxic Deluge is just general removal, and Stern Scolding for everything from Ajani to Ocelot Pride to Seasoned Pyromancer, Voice of Victory, whatever. My side outs, took out the 2 Harbingers. They're a 3-color deck, but their 3rd color, or it's really easy for them to get their base 2 colors, and Harbingers just like giving the 3rd color for free so they can get their basics very efficiently. Board out a couple copies of Unearth and an Oculus. Usually I board out like 1 copy of Unearth, 1 Oculus if I'm expecting a lot of grave hate or just like general amounts of grave hate. I decided to board out the 2nd Unearth because there's a reasonable chance they've got main deck Thraben Charms. So if you've got Thraben Charm on top of something like, what is it? Ghost Vacuum coming in from the board, I just really don't want to be that big in on the graveyard, and I'd rather have Murktide be like my top end payoff since it dodges more. 3 Thought Seizes came out, and then the last one I'm pretty sure is just like a Thought Scour. If I'm boarding out a bunch of Unearths and an Oculus, I don't care about filling up the graveyard or trying to cheat stuff in as much. So Thought Scour is usually like a reasonable trim, already trimming on the Oculus package. So that's how I went for that one. Game 2, they kept a pretty slow hand, like a Guide of Souls into an Ocelot, and I think I had a Fatal Push for the Guide and like a Stern Scolding or something for the Ocelot. Tried to discharge a Frog. I had the discards for it. But I did find out that their Blue Splash was not for Mockingbird. It was for Expressive Iteration. And I don't think I've ever seen Expressive Iteration as a Blue Splash from Energy before. So that was kind of interesting. But either way, we were able to pick up the smooth round 1 2-0 win. Move on to round 2. My opponent, I saw round 1 that they were playing Amulet Titan. So the immediate thought was like, okay, keep a hand that's got some early pressure, Frog, Oculus, something. My first hand I remember was like, it was like Force of Negation, Stubborn Denial, Lorien Revealed, a couple lands, Fatal Push. So like just really, really bad into specifically Amulet Titan. So mold that, found a 7 or a 6 that had Force of Negation, Counterspell, Oculus, 2 fetches, and like a Thought Scour. So it was a little interactive, but I had the ability to get to a turn hard cast Oculus. So I ended up, I think, finding a Stubborn Denial. They didn't have an Amulet. I got the Stubborn Denial, a turn 3 Spelunking. I got to Stubborn Denial, Spelunking, untap, get down an Oculus because I knew they couldn't have a Titan the next turn. And then the very first Oculus Manifest Dread flipped over a Harbinger. So I was able to, I didn't even have to flip up the Harbinger the next turn. I think I did like the next in step and just held up Counterspell through their turn. But did eventually just flip up Harbinger, and that kind of won it for me. Sideboarding against Amulet. Sign to Memory. Definitely coming in. Let's here. Harbinger's coming in. Shoot the Sheriff. Then there's a few kind kind of flex options depending on what you're more concerned about. EE can come in if you're more concerned about saga tokens and amulets. Stern Scolding can come in if you're more concerned about Dryad of the Elysian Grove or Aftermath Analyst, stuff like that. Sometimes I'll board them in if I think my opponent's got like a heavy plan against something I'm doing. For example, if I think that they're on 6 and Seal of Removal and like that's their plan into Harbinger, I'm more likely to bring in something like Stern Scolding. Or if they're on Hex Drinker and their plan is turn 1 Hex Drinker and start leveling it up, then EE gets a lot better. So just some slight changes like that. But if I win game 1 and go to game 2, kind of unsure of what their sideboard juke is, then I'll just do something neutral like the 4 Consign, Harbinger, Shoot the Sheriff, and not overboard. My board outs against Amulet, usually 2, maybe 3 copies of Fatal Push, again, depending on how many things like Azusa, Dryad, Tireless Tracker, stuff like that they're boarding in. I'll trim some amount like an Oculus or an Unearth and an Oculus because of Endurance, which could be coming in, as well as Bajuka Bog. So like hard casting Oculus is going to be less of a consistent play. And then the rest of the sideboard outs are just like some number of spells. I think I kept 1 in because they showed me Explore. And so I figured with like Explore, Aftermath Analyst, the possibility of Rumble, keeping 1 in's fine. You could trim another push instead, or you could keep a push in if you wanted to get rid of the last spell snare. Ultimately, I don't think that slot's going to matter too particularly much. It's also pretty easy to cut like the 3rd Fatal Push, 4th Fatal Push, 3rd Spell Snare if you just want to bring in like like that, or Graveyard Trespasser to have more pressure. But the game 2, I remember I had a quick, they had a whole bunch of forests, like basic forests. I had a quick frog. The frog got dismembered. And then I got down a Harbinger after the frog died. Harbinger was safe. They couldn't get like any explosive mana going because of the Harbinger. And eventually I found a Murktide and was able to just Harbinger plus Murktide hit them out. Like when I say they couldn't get any sort of explosive mana with the Harbinger down, really what I mean is stopping them from doing anything with like Shifting Woodlands or what's the other one? Like Lotus Field, Urza's Cave, anything like that. Just so even though they had the basic forest, not being able to actually hard cast a Primeval Titan until like turn 6 is a big deal. And I had a Thought Seize on turn 1 or 2 to take a Dryad of the Elysian Grove, so I knew they wouldn't be able to get more than just the green and blue off Harbinger. So if they were running something else in the sideboard, some other color option like Witch's Vengeance, I think's the red sweeper, they wouldn't have access to that. But for the most part, the matchup's like fairly reasonable for us. I say fairly reasonable. It's definitely one of the better matchups. Don't do anything to let your opponent have a very explosive start, like an Amulet into Bounce Land, Dryad, whatever. So don't keep a hand that doesn't have any sort of interaction in the first turn or two. That's about it for Amulet. Round 3, up against a player that I played against on Saturday, who was on Burn, Rakdos Burn. So knew what the matchup was going to be. Knew it was definitely going to come down to who was able to get that last top deck. So game one, I kept a hand with a frog. I think I was on the play. Yeah. I was on the play, went land go. Opponent played land goblin guide, swung in, hit me. I don't think I flipped over a land, whatever. Untap, played a turn 2 psychic frog, pass back. Opponent played an Eidolon of the Great Revel. And I've got a hand of Thought Scour, consider, Murktide. So untap, attack in with the frog. They say no blocks. I discard my 2 considers and my 2 Thought Scours. Hit them for 5, and then just play a 7/7 Murktide and say go. And they can't get away from that. Even if they were able to like throw some spells at the Murktide, the Eidolons chunk too much damage if they do. And I've got the frog and the Murktide swinging in the air next turn for not lethal, but enough to lock them out with Eidolon. So pretty quick game one. Game two was kind of the complete opposite. So I boarded in the 3 Stern Scoldings. Not as great on the draw, but a lot better on the play. The 2 Graveyard Trespassers and the Shoot the Sheriff. Boarded out the 3 Fatal Pushes. I didn't know what kind of like grave hate they might be coming with. So I was a little hesitant to board out Oculus Unearth because I kind of need something unfair against Burn. So I ended up boarding out some Harbingers on the draw, and I believe I boarded out 1 copy of Unearth. Again, like they could be on something like Surgical Extraction. They could be on obviously any artifact based grave hate. I don't know. I don't want to assume too much in a matchup like this. I kind of just want to have a frog. But really against Burn, the game plan is mold to frog. Like if you can get down to turn 2 frog, it can stonewall pretty much any creature, and discarding a few cards gets it out of burn spell range, presents a pretty quick clock, helps you find more counter spells. So it's just like the best card in the matchup for you by a mile. But game 2, complete opposite of game 1. I didn't have a removal spell again for a turn 1 threat. So they had like turn 1 Goblin Guide, or turn 1 Swift Spear, turn 2 second Swift Spear Goblin Guide, turn 3 like triple 1 mana 3 damage spell, and I was just like blown out of the water from there. I could have mulliganed more aggressively for a Fatal Push, but I remember my hand was pretty good into non-creature spells. Like I had Stubborn Denial, Force of Negation. I might have had a second Force, a counter spell, and then a threat like a Murktide and a couple fetches. So it's like if my opponent starts off on Suspend a Rift Bolt or Bolt You or something like that, this hand looks really good. I had a Spell Snare. But then they just went like triple 1-drop into like Bolt Wave, skewer the critics, and it's like, all right, yeah, we did. Game 3 back on the play was a lot more what Murktide typically does. Like turn 1, have interaction for your 1-drop. Turn 2, play a frog. Turn 3, I think I hard cast a Graveyard Trespasser and was able to eat some creature every turn for the next like 3 turns. So that effectively negating an extra lightning bolt was a really big deal. But having the frog down, having the Graveyard Trespasser kind of gets you there one way or the other. I think opponent missed their 3rd land drop for a couple turns, so they weren't able to spell quite as efficiently. But either way, able to sneak out of that one with a win. Round 4, I got paired against the guy who ended up winning the entire thing on Through the Breach Eldrazi. Played against them Saturday as well, and kind of got run over. So glad I didn't have to play that matchup again. They've got like heavy Trinispheres in the main. Really straightforward. But I got to draw that one. Round 5, I got paired against a player who's playing a list very close to Aspiring Spike's Kishless Skimmer Unearth deck. So like it's pretty close to a mirror match. They've got Oculus, Frog, Kishless Skimmer, Unearth, Fatal Push, Counterspell, all that stuff. I've got Harbingers and I think Stubborn Denial, something else where they've got Kishless Skimmer, and then they had a couple copies of Emperor Bones as well. But we ended up playing just for the fun of it, and I ended up winning that one in 3. So I'll just go over that a little bit in case anybody's curious. Game 1 was really weird one where I had like double Sink into Stupor basic Swamp as my mana for a good 6-7 turns. Just couldn't find like a fetch land, had a Fatal Push, couldn't find a 4th land. I did end up winning that one because both of us weren't wanting to give up the tempo advantage. We both like got stuck on 3 or 4 lands, and we both weren't wanting to give up the tempo advantage, which in the Dimir mirror, if you're the first person to cast a threat, like let's say it's turn 5 and I cast a Psychic Frog and my opponent spell snares my frog and I counterspell their spell snare, there's a really big risk, because now I'm hugely down on mana now, that they could just go like, all right, extra counterspell on your frog, untap, play a Murktide or play an Oculus, whatever, and I don't have counter magic up. So if I play a threat and I choose to fight over it, then I really run the risk of getting out tempoed depending on my opponent's hand. So neither of us were wanting to do that. The difference was I had a hand where I had a bunch of Fatal Pushes stuck in hand and no Revolt. So if my opponent just hard cast an Oculus, I was dead. But they ended up playing a Frog. I Fatal Push. They fight over it. I fight over it. I untap. Find, I think at this point, my 5th land and just slam Oculus plus Frog and they scoop. So game 2, sideboarding, Mystical Dispute, Toxic Deluge, Stern Scoldings, Graveyard Trespasser, Shoot the Sheriff. The Toxic Deluge is mostly because of Oculus, just wanting to have an out for Oculus plus all the Manifest Dread tokens. Sideboarding out, I actually ended up sideboarding Harbinger out. I know that they're a 3-color deck, but the fact that they can play as a Dimir deck extremely well if they just get their basic swamp made me not want to go down that route. Like, yeah, they have Kishless Skimmer, found out that they've got Pick Your Poison and Abrupt Decay, but at the time, game 1 or going into game 2, I didn't know about Abrupt Decay or Pick Your Poison and just didn't want to like bring in Harbinger and risk it being kind of dead if they just decided to play the Dimir mid-range game. The forces came out. Think I boarded out like 1 Unearth, 1 Oculus, again because if they're bringing in stuff like Nihil Spellbomb, or I knew they had Graveyard Trespasser in their deck because I saw it before. Don't want to be too heavy on those. And then the last board out, what was it? I think it was just like a Thought Scour, because I was a little, like, if I'm already, like I mentioned round 1, if I'm boarding out Unearth Oculus, then trimming on Thought Scour is kind of fine. It might have been a consider, but either way, it was some 1 mana cantrip. Match 2, they're on the play. They play fetch land go. I play fetch land go. They fetch into turn, get an Undercity, flip over an Oculus, untap, land, unearth, and the game is just over at that point. Like, that's the unfair part of unearth Oculus, is sometimes something happens to just make it not matter. But I had a hand of like Psychic Frog, Counterspell, Stern Scolding. I might have had Mystical Dispute, Murktide, stuff like that. Just no way. I know I could answer a turn 2 Frog if they cast one, but I could not answer a turn 2 Unearth on an Oculus. So just kind of a free win there. Game 3, I'm back on the play. I've got like turn 2 Frog, turn 3 discard Oculus, Unearth, Counterspell. Or it's like Thoughtseize into Frog, into Unearth, Counterspell, Oculus. And I believe I Thoughtseized on one. Opponent had the answer to my Frog. And I ended up top decking a Murktide and just like played out a Murktide because they tapped down to 1 on, I think, turn 3. And that ended up being like the game. They just couldn't answer the Murktide. So it ended up swinging in a few times. I might have hard cast the Oculus a few turns later. It got countered, whatever. But Murktide is 9 times out of 10 the way to go. Dodges like Fatal Push, dodges Dismember a lot of the times. Yeah, so Murktide got their game 3. On to top 8. First round of top 8 was, it's really funny when you recap these matches and remember that you're in like a fairly small travel area, because you're going to see a lot of the same people in a lot of tournaments. So I played my first round opponent of top 8. I played Saturday. They were on Neo form. When I played them Sunday, they were on Sam combo. So I knew they were on Sam combo going into the match. Game 1, I'm on the play. I'm the higher seed. We talked about who wanted the invite before the matchup started, and effectively neither of us cared about the invite that much. So we were just playing for the additional prize support. So we had to go ahead and play it out. Game 1, I've got like Thoughtseize into Frog with Force, Counterspell, something else. Just like the run out, a Fatal Push in there, maybe a second removal spell. But either way, just like the run out of kill your mana dork, your halfling on 1, or Thoughtseize your turn 2 play a Frog, Stubborn Denial your Birthing Ritual, and just clean run away. Really just showing the power of the tempo advantage that Frog has. Game 2, sideboarding, I brought in the 2 engineered explosives, which you look at the engineered explosives and you're like, why are you playing that? I think I mentioned it in the intro. Like I said, it's a day later, so I could be wrong. But it was mostly for like the Jeskai Ascendancy deck, but I don't complain about seeing other matchups as well. But brought in the 2 EE, brought in Shoot, brought in the 3 Stern Scolding. I don't think I brought in the Toxic Deluge. You could, I wouldn't fault you, but typically when I play against Samwise, I kind of feel like they have 1 or 2 important creatures and the rest are just kind of mid. So if you want to spend a bunch of mana on a sweeper, you can. I'd kind of rather just spend less mana to pick apart specific things. And Graveyard Trespasser, because it puts some pressure on exiling the Cauldron Familiar when they're like tapped low. Side outs, I brought out the Force Negations. I brought out Stubborn Denial. I brought out a copy of Counterspell. Might have been 2 copies on the draw because Birthing Ritual is a lot more annoying. And on Oculus Unearth, kind of as always. And I think boarded out a couple, 1 or 2 Thought Scour. The Oculus Unearth Thought Scour board out is like my go-to 95% of the time. Just like the first thing I cut, because again, Thought Scour is only good when Oculus Unearth is good, and any sort of Grave Hate Post board, doesn't matter what it is, either makes Oculus more difficult to hard cast or makes Unearth on an Oculus unreliable. So that's free 3 cards to cut pretty consistently. But game 2, I remember they had some greedy mana, and I ended up having like a bunch of early interactions. So they had turn 2 Voice of, what is it? Not Voice of Victory, Voice of Resurgence, the green white 2-drop from like Dragon's Maze. I got a Spell Snare for that. They go turn 3 Birthing Ritual. I counterspell. Turn 4, they go second Voice of Resurgence. I second Spell Snare, second Birthing Ritual. Like, I got nothing for that one. So the next turn, they were able to play a couple 1-drops. They ended up flipping a 1-drop into a Samwise. And I'm thinking like, all right, there's chances I could get comboed out here. I've played out a frog. I'm holding up I think a Shoot the Sheriff. So the next turn I hit him, draw into a Harbinger of the Seas, which I could play out, but I would just tap me out completely. Instead, I like pass back. I think play my 3rd land, pass back. They play land, go in response to their, or not in response, but on their second main phase before their Birthing Ritual trigger. I go to Shoot the Sheriff the Samwise, and this was a mess up on my part. I should have made him use the Birthing Ritual first. But I go to Shoot the Sheriff the Samwise. They respond with their last card in hand being a Court of Calling for 1. They end up getting a Gilded Goose because they didn't want me to be able to attack in with my frog next turn. The Samwise dies. Then Birthing Ritual, I think, finds something that didn't matter all that much. Might have been another Gilded Goose. But either way, there was a chance I just died to combo there if they had courted for a Viscera Seer and maybe could have found a way to combo from there, because it's hard to remember exactly how that one ended up during that 1 turn sequence. But it was something like they might have hard cast the Samwise that turn because they were down to like 1 actual land up, Birthing Ritual, like 2 1-drops, and a Dryad Arbor. And they were going to their end step. I had to Shoot the Sheriff, the Samwise, before they went to the Birthing Ritual trigger. That's when they courted for 1. But I had already taken out a Sylvan Safekeeper early that game, so I knew they couldn't get that, but they could have gotten like a Viscera Seer or something. Either way, I got to get the Samwise off the board, untap, pack in with the frog, they block with the Gilded Goose, and I play out the Harbinger and just like lock out the mana from there. They didn't have a mana dork, and I think the next Birthing Ritual just kind of whiffs on anything important, so I get the win that way. So I remember there was a bunch of interaction early. I remember like double fatal push on a Sylvan Safekeeper on turn 2 or something, which they stacked. They sacked 2 lands to protect, so that slowed them down a lot. Yeah, it's tricky when there's so many game actions that are going on in those first few turns. But either way, he got the win over the Sam combo, go to the semis, play against the same burn opponent that I played round 3 of the Swiss. They wanted the invite. I didn't care for the invite. We came to an agreement. I scooped to them, and that was it. So we did get top 4. The only loss on the day being an intentional scoop on my part. So glad to see that the tournament went well. Either way, let's jump into some of the changes I would make, because I think this is a lot more important than too much of the recap work. So for the changes going forward, I'm mostly going to talk about the cards that I didn't feel performed generically very well when it comes to like your local meta and the specific expectations that you're going to run into certain matchups. Then you've got to understand there's a bit of wiggle room from anything I suggest. I'm just trying to give an idea of, if I'm going into an open field, what didn't feel like it was doing enough for me. The first few picks out of the main deck, the Harbingers were okay. Like, I did get to pick up wins against Sam combo game 2 with the Harbinger, but not game 1. Game 1, I beat Amulet Titan with a Harbinger, but it wasn't needed. So the Harbingers themselves objectively were not the most impactful thing to have in the main, but I would want them in the 75. The Murktides, Frog, Counterspell, great. The Cantrip package, consider a little underwhelming. Like, Thought Scour, I still feel like is a necessity if you're playing Oculus Unearth, just to have more cards hit the yard for a chance at an unfair start. But having the extra 2 cantrips really didn't do anything to improve anywhere. I think I would rather some number of these 4 be a couple extra removal spells, like an extra Dismember, maybe a Shoot the Sheriff in the main, but Dismember especially, just another out to like an Emery on turn 1. The Thought Seizes in the main. Some matchups, like, you're already pretty favored against the combo, the unfair stuff. So Thoughtseize in the main isn't as necessary against those kind of things. I almost feel like it's exclusively for Eldrazi at this point. I don't really want to see it against Boros. I don't really want to see it against Prowess. You're already beating up on like Amulet and Neoform to an extent. So the benefit of running Thoughtseize is pretty limited. You do open yourself up to some lines like Thoughtseize yourself, discard Oculus, be able to unearth it. But I think more often than not, just getting to the next land drop and hard casting Oculus is good enough. So I think I would look at trimming the Thoughtseizes, or at least moving them to the board. So like these 7 slots, I think could be replaced with some extra removal spells, whether it's Dismember or, again, Cut Down, Blood Chief's Thirst, just something, some extra removal. And then the extra 3 or 4 slots you open up from that could be second Stubborn Denial would be really nice. I've been liking Lorien Revealed is just like an early guaranteed land drop in the Murktide list or the Frogtide list. Graveyard Trespassers performed really well for me, so could see that making the move back to the main if you wanted another value play into main deck, Boros, or another value play into game 1 against decks like Boros or Prowess. Yeah, something like that couple extra removal, Graveyard Trespasser to the main, I think is perfectly fine. Out of the sideboard, the third copy of Harbinger, I think is a little overkill. So if you're planning on like moving the Harbingers to the board, I would cut the third copy. Consign is fine. Consign is probably the card out of the sideboard I hate the most because just like Thoughtseize, it feels like it's exactly for Eldrazi and I don't want it for any other matchup. Like you're going to bring it in against Amulet Titan, but I don't feel like it's necessarily needed a lot of the time. You're going to bring it in against Zoo, but kind of the same thing. Not really like the thing you want to be seeing in the matchup. Mystical Dispute was pretty mid. I'd probably cut it. The Engineered Explosives, if you're not expecting a bunch of Saga decks, then EE probably gets the cut. Deluge was fine. Shoot the Sheriff, you can move to the main if you're wanting to move some of these like Thoughtseize Harbingers to the board. Stern Scolding is 3 of was fine. Trespasser, like I said, kind of overperformed for me. So I think some of my initial changes would be something like their cards for in the main. Last 2 slots to be. Maybe just something else in the main that could be Sauron's Ransom. Fine-ish. But you get the idea about just 2 more pieces of interaction or 2 card advantage spells in the main, something like that. And then the sideboard, Deluge, Thoughtseize, Harbinger, Consign, Scolding, Nihil Spellbomb. I missed not having Nihil Spellbomb, not necessarily in this event, but in a couple of the leagues that I've played outside of this event. I really, really wanted Spellbomb, and every time I cut it, I just found myself like feeling absolutely awful for not having it in the 75. So something be a Sync, maybe just a Picklock Prankster, something closer to this. A little more of like a fair game 1, a little better time against the creature decks. You still get to keep all your forces, snares, counter spells, but a little extra interaction for threats on the board. And then sideboard going heavier into like the anti-Eldrazi, anti-big mana, but keeping game 1 for a lot of the fair stuff. But that's kind of the direction I would go. Hopefully this video gives you some ideas to help narrow down your list going into either Indianapolis or your next RCQ. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Love to talk to everybody. Links down below for the Discord if you want to come join, talk about the deck, talk about any changes you're thinking of making, or try to get some feedback. Got a bunch of awesome players there that love to hear what's going on. So other than that, hope you all have a fantastic rest of your morning, evening, afternoon. Stay safe, enjoy some good food and company. I'll catch y'all back live later. Adios for now.